Welcome to everyone who's joining us via the live stream. This event is co-sponsored by St. John's Cathedral, the Office of the Bishop, the Commission on Ministry, and the High Plains region of the diocese. So much thanks to all of those sponsors and everyone who pitched in to make this possible. A really warm welcome to all of you, and Tina Clark, our Director of Formation, to say a warm welcome to all seminarians, ordinands, postulants, and all of you in that discernment process that leads to ordination. But also a warm welcome to everybody. What I'm most excited about is hearing Dr. Willie James Jennings talk about discernment in general, because that goes for the life of all the baptized, not just those with God's help, seeking ordination. So thanks be to God for all of you who are with us this morning. I want to say a quick word about Dr. Jennings' books and commend all of them to you. His first book is titled The Christian Imagination, subtitle Theology and the Origins of Race. Phenomenal, just phenomenal. His second book, and if you were with us this morning at the cathedral, he stayed closely, to a degree, to a few chapters in his commentary on the Acts of the Apostles. If you're interested, this morning, Dr. Jennings was talking about Pentecost and how the coming of the Holy Spirit in Pentecost, in Acts, and today opens up places and spaces for storytelling, for communion across differences of lived experience, for a lot of room for personality and perspective and all of that. It was a wonderful talk this morning. It is available on the Cathedral's YouTube channel. Finally, his most recent publication is titled After Whiteness, An Education in Belonging, a mesmerizing, thoughtful, fascinating read. These three books are very different, but they're profoundly complementary, and it's just one of the reasons why we're just thrilled to have him this weekend here at the Cathedral. The title of his afternoon's talk is Against the Finished Man, Crafting a Life of Service and of Ministry. Please join me in welcoming him warmly to this gathering.
Good afternoon, dear friends. It is a joy to be with you today. I want to thank this wonderful pastor, Pastor Richard, and his wonderful wife for being such great hosts. I especially want to thank Tina Clark. And Tina, wherever you are, I want people to see you. Would you? Tina has done a remarkable job in shepherding me here. We've been trying to get me here for at least 2 years. It is not her fault. It is all my fault, given my schedule. But I want to thank her for her persistence and her kindness and the tremendous hospitality she has shown since I've got on that plane and came here. And as I said to the folks this morning, I want to thank you all, those of you who clearly are powerful prayer warriors, to move the snow so that I could come. So thank you so much. Thank you so much for making that possible. I live in Hamden, Connecticut, so I'm in New England, and so I'm back in snow after many years in the Carolinas, and so I'm someone who appreciates cold and snow. Friends, allow me, as I did this morning, to bring warmest greetings from Dean Gregory Sterling, the faculty, the staff, the students of Yale Divinity School, where I have the great joy of serving there. And as I mentioned this morning, where I live in Hamden, Connecticut, right by Yale, and Yale University, which is in New Haven, all of that is on the unceded land of Algonquin-speaking peoples, the Mohican, the Quinnipiac, and many others. And I have made a promise, like so many others in my area have made a promise, to honor the land that these people have and continue to shepherd, and to be a part of whatever efforts I can be a part of to give the land back. And it's always important, I think, these days, especially where institutions and speakers do land acknowledgement, to remember that it's not an acknowledgement unless it turns toward getting the land back. And so I am thankful to God to be able to have my life on land. So today, what I would like to do, excuse me if I get my iPad here working. It's an excellent piece of equipment, but you just have to get used to it. And so, what I like to do today is, as the pastor said, talk to you about crafting a life in ministry and service. The title, Against the Finished Man, crafting a life of ministry and service. And in my mind, I've envisioned this more as a conversation than me simply talking at you. So I'm not going to be talking long. I hope we'll be able to talk together soon. But I want to begin with the decision. In fact, I want to begin with two decisions. The first decision is the one that many of us and many of you in this room have made, to say yes to ministry and service of many types. For several decades, I've been involved in the lives of people who've made that glorious decision. Wow. What a joy to be with people who've made that decision. And the glorious thing to journey with people in the crafting of a life inside the decision to do service. For some, as I've taught them over my many years, that decision remains ambiguous. They're not sure that they're headed toward anything actually called Christian ministry, but they want to do something. And so the decision remains ambiguous, but it is yet noble. But for many others, I should dare say the vast majority of the others, it is the decision to turn their life toward the life of Jesus. And in so doing, to enter the way of discipleship. And with it, a different way of living and being in the world that is attuned to the suffering and the pain around us. What an amazing decision to attune one's life to suffering and pain. That decision to follow Jesus means being willing to place our bodies as bridges between suffering, that suffering and the power of divine love, and to enter the task of crafting a life toward that end. But there is another decision that I want to talk about as well. And it's a decision that precedes that first decision I just mentioned. It is the decision made for us about how we are to be as educated people. It is the decision about how we are to be made ready to lead and offer service. It is the decision about how we should be oriented to the task of crafting a life. And that orientation, my friends, that orientation is toward being formed into the finished man. It is precisely that formation toward and into the finished man that I have been troubled by for all my life in the academy and in the church. That formation toward the finished man, lay at the heart of so many of our problems at this moment. Yet both these decisions, the one we make and the one that is made for us, are open-ended. That's what I want to get across today. They're open-ended. They invite us to an ongoing work, an ongoing struggle, if you will, of crafting a life. So the question I want to explore with you this afternoon is, how might we craft a life against the finished man? How might we craft a life against the finished man? What is the finished man? I'm so glad you asked that question. You're so sharp right off the bat. Its basic contours gestured nicely through what the late, great theologian, Lutheran theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer called the Sicut Deus, that is, the false image of God, a false image of a completeness that danced in the fantasies of Adam and Eve as they looked on the fruit of the forbidden tree and imagined themselves wise and prepared after the eating a new world. It is a new world envisioned through the eyes of the colonial masters that created for us this struggle of crafting inside toward the finished man. The struggle of crafting a work against a work, and thereby a becoming against a becoming, a building against a building, and a formation against a formation. But how do you tear down a work of crafting rooted in a dream of becoming, a powerful and compelling dream that can easily pull you in so deeply that you end up tearing down only the impediments to that dream? The colonial master's dream has been elegant and efficient in pulling forward ancient strands and waterways, plants and animals, minerals, precious stones, and people. And you begin to build a productive place. Let's not ask how you came into possession. Let's just say that you have. But imagine that you've come into possession and you begin to build a productive place. You have learned your Lockean lessons from John Locke. What I cultivate, I own with God's approval. What I cultivate, I own. If it's not cultivated, no one owns it. And you are realizing profit and power that you and your ancestors in the old world never knew. It is then that you look at the world you are creating, and at the same moment, you look at your children and you seek the children that you seek to cultivate, and you ask the question that will join those two creations: the world you are creating and the children you are cultivating. You ask the question that joins those two creations in progress: who must my sons and my daughters become to inherit my world and continue to build it better? One more time. Who must my sons and daughters become in order to inherit my world and continue to build it better? Your question travels into your children like genetic coding, making them susceptible to a tragic answer. Who must they become? They must become white, self-sufficient men, able to show in body and mind, in action and reaction, control, possession, and mastery. They must be able to control their passions and urges, their anger and enthusiasm. They must be in possession of strong minds and bodies and able to maintain possession of what they have been given and what they will inherit. And they must be prepared to face the unknown with a commitment to its mastery, to go from one obstacle to the next, to go from mastery to mastery. In other words, they must show their finish. They must show their finish, that this finish is the beginning of a life with power, a life that begets power, aims for profit and productivity, and a promise to be a builder, to build what I have even better. The children of the Master will seek a becoming and thereby will aspire to the finish. Now, my friends, all of Western education, again, all of Western education is formed between the dream of the colonial masters and the aspirations of his sons and daughters. It is the dream of how the colonial masters wanted to be seen in and through their progeny. How they wanted to be seen less than who they were, but how they were to be projected into the future. What does it mean to be inside someone else's dream? What does it mean to be inside the aspirations of others? And what does it mean to be educated between dream and aspiration? And to be invited to craft one's life toward becoming the finished man? These are the questions that those of us committed to ministry and service of any kind, especially in the name of the triune God, are obliged to answer, because it was theological education and ministerial formation that set this decision in place. You see, theological education in the colonial world first formed white self-sufficient men who would in turn establish a formation process not only aiming toward whiteness, but constituted in whiteness. Whiteness, always important for me to explain whiteness, because so few people in this world explain whiteness. To speak of whiteness is to speak of a historical process of identity crafting. One more time. To speak of whiteness is to speak of a historical process of identity crafting. Whiteness is not phenotype. I have to say this everywhere I go because it's important. Whiteness is not phenotype, not first appearance or biology or culture, and certainly not a part of God's creation. Whiteness is a way of seeing the world and a way of being in the world at the same time, and a way of being seen in the world. Whiteness is a way of organizing the world, making sense of the world. And whiteness is having the power to order one's world by that effort. Whiteness is an engine of aspiration. So when we say a white self-sufficient man, we are not talking about some particular guy of the past or the present, but an invitation. An invitation offered to everyone, male, female, gay, trans, non-binary, every ethnicity, class or social status or nationality, anyone and everyone touched by Western education. It is an invitation to become significant by learning to see like the Master. Learning to see like the Master. There is, however, another kind of crafting available to us that brings us into that crucial dynamic of Jesus and the crowd. Jesus gathers a crowd. That there's nothing else you remember today, remember that one little sentence: Jesus gathers a crowd. And I want to hold up this dynamic as the site, S-I-T-E, the site for crafting a life in service and a life in ministry. The site where the lack of control, the lack of possession and mastery meets Jesus and those disciples. The crowd can never be made self-sufficient. Indeed, the crowd exposes the truth that Jesus and his disciples are joined with them in need for God's help. And in so doing, the crowd forces an exegesis. It is the crowd that is the catalyst for the exegesis of God in Jesus. And I would also say for the elaboration of a project of crafting life. A poem for us entitled Before the confession, here was crying out. Before the teaching, here was feeling terror. Before the word spoken, here was longing for. You have heard it said. Here now, breathing, reaching, waiting. People sensing the many. Salvation beginning. At the sight of the crowd, we are invited to think the relation of the one to the many. It is that relation that is the starting point for crafting a life. The relation of the one to the many. What is the relation of the one to the many? You are so sharp. Great question. What is the relation of the one to the many? Well, that question, depending on how we answer it, clarifies or obscures ministry and service. To answer that question, we must discern who is the one and who are the many. It is precisely clarifying the one that determines whether we are crafting life as disciples of Jesus or crafting life aimed at the finished man. They present two different ways of imagining organization. I have to say that again because I don't want that to run by you. They represent two different ways of imagining organization. That is, the ordering of the one and the ordering of the many. So a life crafted in the pedagogical decision of Western education, the pedagogical decision born of Western education toward formation into the white self-sufficient man, is a life that seeks to organize the many for utility, defined by the one. Again, it seeks to organize the many for utility. This represents the logic of the plantation. This is the logic of the plantation, where all life, human, plant, animal, all life is bound by a quest for an efficiency and productivity in service to the identity of the owner. He runs a tight ship. The many in this trajectory of crafting life encircle the one, edify the one, enlighten the one, are in service to the one, and ultimately show us the one in all their glory. And of course, if you haven't been following, let me make this clear. The one is not Jesus. The one who must be seen in such crafting schemas is the one who is leading, showing and organizing of the many toward what the one imagines as the good. The many in this regard belong to the good that the one imagines for them. But who are the many? Who are the many in this regard? The many, as we began to note a moment ago, are not just human persons, but plant and animal persons, as indigenous scholars would tell us today. They are plant and animal persons. The many are all those who may become useful. All those who may become useful. Usefulness in this regard becomes the basis for a vision of maturity, making people useful. Making things useful becomes the basis of a vision of maturity. The maturity of mind, body, and built environment that calibrates maturity by productivity. This is the way of the colonial settlers. They came believing that God had set them in place to bring the world to maturity. This was the way in which they would show their salvation, in effect, by maturing not only indigenous body and mind, but the land itself. And with this, there is an abiding, extractive, and exploitive character to this form of crafted life. Let me say that again because I want to make sure you get that. There is an abiding, extractive, and exploitive character to this form of crafted life, where we are invited to continually ask the question that Wendell Berry made famous many years ago. What is that question? What are people for? What are people for? That question in and of itself is a horrible question, but it is the question that is at the heart of this form of crafted life. Indeed, it is a question that could be asked, but asked only by one, and that one is God. Only God can ask the question, what are people for? Because only God has the answer to that question. But I'm jumping ahead. Return to where I am. What does it mean, though, to have that question, what are people for, moving ever more deeply into one's life? What does it mean to have that question moving ever more deeply into a life that is supposed to be aimed at ministry and service, supposed to be shaped by leadership? That question means that concern and care for the many, whether they are plants or animals or humans, is guided by the logic of investment for the future. Investment for future use. To care about the planet only for the sake of its future productivity is not to care about the planet. Reversing this colonial logic of life and leadership is not easy. Why? Because, my friends, door's open, but I'll go ahead and say this. It works. It draws on the irrepressible energy. It is that energy of greed that not only moves inside of contorting it toward energy. There is, however, a different ordering constituting a good found in belonging to the many. This different ordering of the one to the many finds us amid the power of the gathering, the power of the gathering to craft a life. As I note in my book, After Whiteness, the direction of formation I am suggesting here moves us toward cultivating the capacity to draw people together, friends, strangers, enemies, into a shared project of living. Everywhere I go and I try to explain what I mean by that, it's always interesting to see people really struggle with this fundamental basic idea that no matter what you're forming someone to be, whether they're going to be a doctor, a dentist, a nurse, a minister, a plumber, whatever you're forming them to be, the sign of excellence ought to first be that they are able to gather people together who normally would not want to have anything to do with one another, but they are together because of the way in which that person does their work. What would it mean to have institutions shaped by that as the fundamental excellence that defines what we do, and not the pursuit of possession, mastery, and control? But here I want to press that shared project of living, that capacity to cultivate a shared project of living into its dimensions for crafting a life within the giving life of Jesus. Again, crafting a life within the giving life of Jesus. It is the giving life of Jesus, the giving of Jesus to the crowd, that sets the stage for a life formed in the gathering and in his giving. So another poem for us, another poem. This one entitled, Giving Decision. Giving Decision. It was then he decided, after seeing the screams, the pushing and shoving, compressing desire to a single reaching for his skin, his ears covered with their voices, unable to hear himself think or pray, his eyes filled with their tears, a constant baptism. It was then he decided, with his flow now matching her flow of blood, his power taken from him, captured by her longing, his words pulled from his mouth and consumed greedily. Every form of body pressed against his body, beyond lust, beyond loneliness, beyond knowing into feeling, beyond holiness into hunger. It was then he decided to let them have his whole body. His soul belonged to God. What does it mean to craft a life inside the giving found in Jesus? Here I want to press into that giving's disruptive character. That giving's disruptive character. Let me draw your attention just for a moment to that famous passage in the Gospel of Mark. That is, as the New Testament scholars tell us, the climax of that gospel, Mark 10:45. Mark 10:45, which I'm sure all of you have memorized, but I'll just go ahead and read it for those of you, the two or three who don't. For the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve and give his life a ransom for many. And I want to focus on that word, ransom, lutron in Greek, in its important theological dimensions as its common understanding, the ending of captivity for a slave or for a prisoner. Now, in our time together, since this is not my classroom at Yale, I am not interested right now in rehearsing the beautiful history of ransom theorization, though I would recommend that to you. I'm not interested in rehearsing the history of ransom theorization for atonement theologies. I want to capture that essential element that we find in all ransom theorization. What is that? That Jesus enters the logic of exchange networks and crumbles them from within. The logic of an exchange network, this one for that one. He enters that logic and he crumbles it from within. His life will break open. His life will break open the exploitation of life. If you remember nothing else, his life will break open the exploitation of life. His body will intercept extractive practice and become the permanent site of extraction. His body will become the permanent site of extraction. He is the slave that ends slavery. He is the sacrifice that ends sacrifice. Now, we all know in this room that the subtleties of this ending have often been lost on the church and Christians who have made the life of Jesus the alibi for slavery, the alibi for patriarchal control of women's bodies, and the alibi for extractive practices. And if I have positioned the life of Jesus at the site, S-I-T-E, the site of extraction, have I not left in place the very problem of life being crafted toward the finished man? The very problem I'm trying to address here today. That is, have I simply left in place the justification for extractive practice? Possibly. But if his life is the source of life, if the life of Jesus is the source of life, then it is a source that reorients our life, not only by drawing our hungers and our needs into his body, as I mentioned with the poem, but also enabling by the Spirit a path toward shared, thriving life at his body. Shared, thriving life at the site of his body. So I want to think this crafting of a life that I'm inviting us all into, the crafting of a life inside this reorientation in two senses. First, it is the crafting of a life that discerns and seeks to work against extractive practice. It seeks to work against extractive practice. The vast majority of the forms of leadership sponsored through Western education, alive in the Western world, are based in extractive practices, rooted in asking the question, what are people for? Thinking in terms of strategies of what can I get out of people? And we compliment ourselves on the accomplishment of getting out of people that which we want. So the first sense of a different kind of crafting, a different reorientation of crafting, is to discern and seek to work against extractive practice. If Jesus' life makes visible the depth of theft, of body, of land, of plant, of animal, of time and energy, then from his body, we can begin to see the depth of our own formation in extractive practice and to see how that practice goes all the way down to the bone and the dirt. But seeing, my friends, as you all know in this room, and I look forward to our conversation about this, seeing is only half the problem. Seeing extractive practice is only half the problem. The other half is beginning to imagine life that presses against extractive practice. As inheritors of colonial practices that shunned indigenous logics of reciprocity and balance, of giving back in return for what was taken, we have learned to think and imagine community inside commodity relations. That means we organize life between production and consumption and back to production again. Our lives are organized inside the repetition of production, consumption, and back to production again. And so the question for us here is, what is required to craft a life inside a world of reciprocity and balance, a life of giving back and receiving with thanksgiving? Well, one way to start to think against extractive practice is to return to the idea of the repetition, of the daily repetition, the daily asking for our bread, to contemplate life between invocation and benediction. That repetition that is our life is rooted in living always between baptism and Eucharist, between life inside the baptism of Jesus and the eating of his flesh and the drinking of his blood. Invocation and benediction are inside baptism and the eating. There, with the repetition, the daily repetition, we are invited to see misuse and abuse through harmful labor, draining work, and forms of exploitation that give more over of life to death. This is the crucial question. What kind of work surrounds us? What kind of work are we commending? And what kind of work are we celebrating? The second sense of reorientation here would bring us to something I mentioned this morning, and that is to think the crafting of a life toward the many, toward a shared life that begins in learning. Learning aimed at the expansion of our identities inside joining with others. The colonial legacy we inherited set in place the logic of a teacher without remainder, which is a terrible logic, a teacher without remainder. This is what I called earlier the logic of a pedagogical imperialism, in which a white Christian world formed and looked out on non-white people as consistently, perpetually, eternally students, and the European and his descendants as always teachers. That pedagogical imperialism submerged and, more precisely, strangled a way of being that would be a learner with the world, with people, with animals, plants, and water, and wind, and all the creation itself, and presented a way of being in the world shaped through conquest and competition and angled toward forms of gathering rooted in greed. I am commending, then, a form of life where we give ourselves to others as learners for the sake of thriving life together. To be a learner who is always as learner leader, And this, of course, is rooted in the very incarnation of our God. Where, as I said this morning, our God came and gave witness to the divine life, not first by talking, but by listening and learning. Who was God's first teacher? Mary, of course. Mary was not only the bearer of God, Theotokos, but the pedagogue of God, the teacher of God. And he is one who learned, and out of his learning comes his teaching. Now, there is much more to say, but as I'm looking at your faces and I can see the wonderful questions forming, let me just pause and start right here and start to take some questions. Thank you very much. So, my dear sister has a microphone, so if you would give us your name, where you are, and then your question. And if it's a statement, at least try to conceal it as a question.
Thank you very much.
Just put,
Thank you very much for sharing with us. I have a personal question. As a scientist and engineer, I don't believe in the resurrection, nor the virgin birth, nor the transformation. Why do I need Jesus?
You don't. You don't need Jesus. Next question. Well, but let me say a little bit more. Please do say a little bit more. If, in fact, your life has not been presented as someone, or I should put it this way, if your life as you live it now, there's no surprise waiting. There's no deeper truth. You need Jesus if you want a real life, but you don't need Jesus for a good life. Next question.
Dr., the way we look at stuff, about 2 years ago, the Biden administration, and nothing against Joe Biden, put together a thing called the Cyber Corps. And what it was, Department of Homeland Security, and they started out 2 years ago, give or take, by recruiting 30 people into this program, and it's been about 60 people a year to get plugged into different sections of the government. And in this program, they're only asking for people that have computer science backgrounds, experience. Could you take this and maybe deconstruct it into something that would be akin to what?
Let me see if I'm following. So it sounds like you're asking a question about the way in which people might be selected for vocation based solely on their expertise. Am I getting that right?
And their training.
And their training. Right. So a more holistic way to understand what it means to strive for excellence in their work is beyond simply the task, but the kind of person they will be and the way in which they will help to build life together in this world. It is an incredibly dangerous thing to evaluate people solely on the particular one. So, whenever I talk about this, there will always be this question. So I'll go ahead and ask it before someone else asks it. So there'll be the question like this. Well, Dr. Jennings, look, if I have to have surgery, I want a doctor who has possession, control, and mastery of their field. That's what I want. All this other stuff you're talking about, I don't care about. I want a doctor who has that. And and I always will say to a person who says that, their field, run as fast as you can. Run away as fast as you possibly can. Because that doctor will kill you and say it was your fault. Anyone who has achieved a level of trying to learn. So to imagine that you train people toward those categories that you want them to embody is ridiculous if you want to train people in excellence. You train them so that they understand that they are a part of a larger reality and that these skills are inside that larger reality. All of us who have been around hospitals, and many of you have, you all know that the people who really run the show are the nurses anyway. We all know this. And for so many of us, if you ask, who would you like to put your life, because often the nurse will have the same expertise as the doctor, but understands that the person in the bed is the point, not my knowledge. My knowledge is in service to the person in the bed. The person in the bed is not in service to me showing my knowledge. Yeah. All right, next question.
Good afternoon, Dr. Jennings. My name is Anna. And I think I heard you mention at least 3 practices of cultivating a different kind of life. One of them is having this capacity to bring people together who wouldn't be together otherwise, resisting extractive practices, and cultivating a kind of revolutionary intimacy between people that you alluded to earlier.
And life is a learner, but you're just about there, yes.
Are these 3 ways and 3 practices through which the empire can be undone? And do you know of also other ways, or are these the primary ways through which you believe the empire can be resisted, faced, and undone?
That's a great question.
Thank you.
Are these, can the empire be undone? I think it can be the formation toward the empire can be undone. Whether the empire can be undone, let's just wait on that. But I do think our formation toward the empire can be undone. And today I'm more concerned about our formation, the crafting work that we imagine ourselves doing, and what it means to lead, and what it means to facilitate people joined in a shared project of thriving, and how we can do that without reestablishing the logic of the empire. So yes, great question. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Eileen, and I'm defining your word real life
Yes.
as being the bridge between suffering and divine love. And how difficult that is when, in my situation, where my discipleship is in the workplace as a businesswoman, in the transition of the social justice transition, right? And I guess my question is, how do we navigate when it's not here yet? And we're trying to be learning leaders with groups of people, moving them to this new story, right? When in fact, there's hybrid solutions where you're extracting at the same time you're moving forward, right? There's not this clear, defined solution during this transition.
Great question. What you do is the first thing you do is you name it, you note it, that I am inside an extractive practice that works. So you name it to everybody. And then you start to ask, what little decisions can be made inside this practice that starts to crumble it from within? So I was telling somebody this yesterday. In my institution, there was a recent search that ended with the candidate that the chair of the search wanted. But the process was not good. The result was good, but the process was not good. And so some people would say, okay, well, the result's good, let's keep on pushing. But no, the process of how we got here didn't build community. And so I want to first of all name that. Then second, work against that being repeated, right? So what we all must think about is how we reverse a practice, a set of practices that work, but that recapitulate the plantation. That's what we have to work against. We have to work against ways of being in the world, ways of reaching for productivity and efficiency that turn people into useful things. And that's a challenge because the reward system is set up for you not to worry about that. But to be in ministry and service is to work in the opposite direction. And there's a hand in the back too.
And then I'll head back there.
Well, welcome, Dr. Jennings.
Thank you, thank you.
I bring you greetings from the entering class of 1990 at Duke Divinity School. So I am aging you right now.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. It's good to see you, Reverend.
I love you, and it's good to be in this space with you.
Love you too.
For those that don't know, I want to thank Broderick and Pastor Richard for creating this space for conversation. I pastor Trinity United Methodist Church that's been active in this city since 1859. And like the good folks here at the Cathedral, Trinity aspires to be a space of inclusion. And we are in a season where the empire is striking back.
Everywhere.
And there's active hell that happens. And as pastor of my white space, I have frustration with whiteness voices that don't break their silence beyond these gatherings that we have of like-minded folks in an ecosystem. So what will be your word to the local church to be hopeful, to transform the narrative of whiteness? And how do you encourage, and this is probably a two-part question, white voices in this space to move this conversation out of this hall and into the streets, into our neighborhoods, and into our politics?
Oh, great questions. Thank you, Pastor. Great question. So, yes, please. I always think we start with the small that gather together with us. So in every church and in every community, there's those faithful few that you can begin with who will risk a different way of being in the world together. And so you start with them and you work with them to create a sound that others will hear. And if you are able to do that, then the hope, the prayer, is that others will sense the Spirit of God calling them to a new work. But we have to remember, we're up against so much. We're up against, as we've been talking about today, these practices that orient us away from what I've been talking about. We are shaped in communities that are built in such a way to constantly undermine life together. And so we have to work both in terms of changing practices and changing the way we live in our built environments. That's really where you get started in doing this work. And of course, you pace yourself because this is the long haul. Great question, Pastor. Great question.
Thank you for coming here. It's been a pleasure.
My pleasure.
I have a question which relates to your pedagogical imperialism.
Imperialism, yes.
And I'm wondering if
I have a term I call existential psychological trauma. And I'm thinking that that is operative in the environment that we find ourselves, the one you talked about both this morning and also at lunch, regarding how people are impacted by thinking of plants, animals, resources, etc.,
Yes.
being used for profitability rather
Yes.
than used for service to free people in mind, spirit, and
Yes,
body
yes.
from their condition.
Yes.
How would we break through? Which comes first, the chicken or the egg, or is it both coming at the same time? And what do we do? Where do we start, from your opinion?
That's a great question. I always like to think in these moments when someone asks me a question of that genre, think about the great lesson I learned from Tink Tinker, who is here in Denver, and the great late Vine Deloria Jr. and so many other indigenous peoples, as they talk about what it means to have eating practices that are rooted in reciprocity. And many of you have heard this story before, but it's often told by so many indigenous communities around the world, that at the beginning of the hunting season or the gathering season, the elders of the people would go to the elders of the animals or the tree elders. How they knew who they were the elders, I don't know, but they would go to the elders and they would ask permission to hunt, ask permission to harvest, with the following promises. Promise number one, we will only take what we need to eat. Promise number two, nothing will be wasted. You will not see your kin laying on the ground. Nothing will be wasted. Promise three, we will give back. And that giving back looked multiple ways, but that was promise number three, we will give back. And only with those promises was permission given to hunt, to harvest. And without those promises, permission was not given. So I like to say, if I were king of education in this country, every year, at the start of the year, I would have every student go to a meat processing plant with me. Every year. And I would want them to see the animals from the time that they're gathered, slaughtered, prepared, shipped. I would want them to see all of it. And then I would ask them the question, did we ask the animals for permission to do this? And I can guarantee that all the students would say, no, we did not. Therein lies the beginning of the lesson of reciprocity that we have not learned. And so it begins with the recognition that permission ought to be asked. Permission is given. And all of that is shaped inside thankfulness. As I told my daughters when they were growing up, this is why we say thank you for the food. It's not superficial ritual. It is about what it means to live in a world that makes your living possible. Other creatures make your life possible. And so being able to be inside that reality of reciprocity is crucial for us. It's crucial for a serious ethic that so many of us lack. Thank you. And then there's a question out here in the front.
Good afternoon, Stephen Wilson, a retired Episcopal priest. I've been curious about, over a good part of my ministry, about non-coercive preaching or non-coercive leadership. And one of the dynamics that you continue to see in the church, I grew up in it, and that part, is the highlighting of individuals who are seen as good preachers or the wise ones. And one of the difficulties about being a parish priest is the question about congregations looking at you as the person bringing something, right? And yet, the qualities of gathering and of asking the questions in a non-coercive way. I'm curious to you how you see we make this transition in this time period when there's a struggle to recruit people and to train people. But what do you see in this sort of framework you're talking about, the key roles of the person who's stepping into facilitating?
Especially in ministry, to think of themselves as artists, to think of themselves as musicians, understands the last thing the band, and as you all know, a good band, everyone else when they play. And to the day, the hour that they found their sound. And so I try to tell people, especially in ministry, you are the facilitator of the community finding its sound, of hearing its collective wisdom, of hearing its collective voice, its collective creativity. If it's just for them to say, oh man, you are a great horn player, great. What are the rest of us going to do? But when you understand that it is about finding the sound, but in order to find the sound, you have to love the other musicians. You have to love their sound individually and together. You know, anytime you listen to a great band and if a band member dies or they leaves, the first thing the other band members will say, it's hard for us to hear without her. She's gone. And so there is something about that reality of, it's more than just facilitation. It's, as I said, it's Jesus in the crowd. The crowd is the occasion for the exegesis of God and Jesus. Without the crowd, you would not know that this is God in the flesh. The crowd brings it out. The crowd brought out his sound. That is crucial for us. And it's unfortunate for so many of us, as I said with this talk, because we were shaped toward the finished man, we're toward death. It's a death that we just don't know is already there waiting for us to try to show our finish. There's nothing more painful than to watch someone their entire life, whatever they're doing, trying to show their finish. It's a horrible way to live, even if they are effective.
Dr. Jennings, I'm a transgendered woman, and I have a burden for the transgendered people that have been told by people that say they are speaking for God that God hates them.
Right.
For 17 years, I've had a small ministry trying to reach some, but I feel like God wants me to do more. What can you tell me with your experience? How can I expand that? I'm also in discernment to becoming a deacon.
Wonderful. I don't know if people caught. Everybody catch the question here? So you are in a transgender ministry that you are trying to form, and you're also discerning, calling to become a deacon. Well, the good news is that as you continue to answer that call, you will be gathered with other people of like mind who will come by and support you. What we all need when we sense a call to ministry is friends. And so my prayer for you is that you will have friends. You need friends. You need your band. So what you have to do is open your ears to the sound of others they don't play like you, but they play in ways that you like. And so that's the challenge. But I certainly want to encourage the move toward theological education. This is very exciting. I know this is always self-serving, but so what? Thank you so much for that question.
Thank you all for your patience as we move about. Hello. A simple question maybe, but I was listening to your process of production, consumption, production. I'm in my third trimester of life, so I think I'm more in the consumption stage. And I'm wondering, for those of others who might be in my same retirement boat, how is it we craft a life for the remainder of our time that can be of value and of service?
Great question. And it ties to the question this wonderful person here asked, and that has to do with figuring out who are your friends and who can speak into your life right now. This is always the most important thing for us. Who speaks truth to us that's in our life? And then the other part of it, as my wife would say, and do we listen? Now, I won't look at anybody around you. I'm just going to say it. But it's always those two questions. Who speaks truth to our life, and do we listen? And where do we sense the Spirit of God leading us in the process of listening and people speaking? And that is absolutely crucial. There is something incredibly important about coming to that crucial prayer of saying to God, in what ways have I not yielded to your Spirit at this point? And then opening ourselves up to where the Spirit would lead us. And that, for some reason, the older you get, the more difficult it is to say that out loud. And I think it's because there's something in us that knows the area in our life where we have purposely not listened. And so to actually pray that prayer is to say, I'm admitting to you, God, that there is a level of reality in my life that I have refused. And now at this point, I will no longer refuse it. And the frightening truth is that the minute you say that, God will come for you. God will come for you. You know, I said this morning to folks. I have never been someone who believes that we have to go searching for the will of God. I've never believed that. I've always been convinced that what each of us must do is stop resisting the will of God. And there's a sense in which we already know what we may not have the specifics, but we know, and we have to stop resisting it. It is the resistance that's what's at stake for us right now, especially in this moment. It's the resistance of the church to building life with others. It's the resistance of individual Christians to opening their lives to others. That's the struggle of this moment. That's the struggle. All right, yes.
Dr. Jennings, Richard, I'd love to hear you say a little bit about the place and role of solitude.
Of solitude?
Solitude. And I'm thinking about not as an opposite of the crowd, but Jesus needing to get away when we need to get away. And it's not literally, we sometimes need to get away in order to be better connected to the crowd, to hear the reverberations, the echoes within ourselves. But sometimes it seems like there's a place for solitude as well.
Absolutely. And I think this is always so important for us. But I think we often, there's a reality of solitude that we haven't really got our minds around enough. And that is, when Jesus is alone, Jesus is never alone. He's with the other creatures. And there is something about the shifting, the modulating of presence that's in solitude, right? That what really is at stake is that there are the times when we have to listen to our creaturely kin for a moment in ways that we have not. So that the solitude is not so much getting away, it's entering into a different mode of listening that involves the world, right? That, as you said, is never discontinuous from the crowd, but is all a part of being able to hear and be restored and refreshed in this world and in this work. And so that is an incredibly important part of what it means to be in ministry and service. There's a book I'll recommend to you all. It's by Doug Christie called The Blue Sapphire of the Mind. The Blue Sapphire of the Mind. Doug E. Christie. It really is about a monastic practice tied to ecological concerns. It's a really excellent book. Recommend that to you all. Great question, Pastor. So I certainly commend a practice of solitude, but what I mean by that is to modulate your listening to those more than human persons. Yes, this question here.
I found it interesting that you advocated theological education to this woman's question because your book doesn't make it sound super attractive.
Well, in its current problems, it's not, but in its possibilities, it really is. But anyway, your question.
Well, I'm just curious what you see as the relative merits of trying to change some of these very white male institutions from the inside versus, creating new institutions.
Yeah, I think we want to do both. A crumbling is always possible inside a building up, and a building up is always possible inside a crumbling. And so, we are at a moment when people are starting to sense the damaging reality of that model of being human, being leader, being minister, being servant, being teacher. In recent years, last 15 years, I've had students come to my office and say to me things that I never thought students would say. I'll never forget, I mentioned this in the After Whiteness book. There was a young man who came to see me. He was the son of a Presbyterian minister, the grandson of a minister, the great-grandfather had been a governor and a senator, so all these very powerful men in his family. And, and he came to me and he said, I love my father, I love my uncles who are all successful businessmen, and then he looked me in the eye and he said, but I don't want to be them, Dr. Jennings. How do I not become them? Because the plan is for me to be them. Now, the question itself was salvation. The question itself was salvation, that he knew that there was a different way of being in the world, that because he was a minister, because he was in seminary, because he was in theological education, that there was a different way of being in the world that he was supposed to be moving toward. And so I'm thankful that there are an increasing number of people. They're asking that question, how can I not be that? Touchdown! So I do think we always want to remember the possibilities of life coming out of death. And in places where there is no hope, we can spy out the possibilities of hope. Yeah. But that's a great question.
Okay, so this is going to push a little bit on the same thing.
Okay.
I love how Audre Lorde can hold this paradox of you cannot dismantle the master's house with the master's tools. But she has another essay that talks about, well, what are we going to do? Get away with we can't totally rid the world of language. Even language has been a tool of the master. And I think about education in the same kind of way. And yet we still have so many gatekeepers. And the way theologians talk to one another, the way that theology is taught is so violent we tell students to write arguments, defend them, provide evidence, come to a conclusion, prove your way. And you, in this beautiful book, you write in poetry. You're one of the few theologians where I see like you're making art to speak in a different way that is not violent. But I guess I want to push a little bit more on it because I feel like these spaces in the academy are so hard to create and they're so hard to find. How do we continue to do that? And I keep going back to Audre Lorde going, is this one of those things where I'm trying to dismantle something with the master's tools? Or is there, what's essential here that's like language that I have to keep and I have to transform because I can't be completely rid of it?
Great question. So for me, I respect Audre Lorde's wisdom there. I prefer to think in terms of fragments. And I mentioned that this morning. And so, excuse me. The thing about, have you ever been in a room with a bunch of quilters? Oh, at some point in time in your life, you've got to hang out with some quilters. Especially older women who are quilters. If you ever come to one of those their quilting circles, sometimes they'll let a guy show up, but you got to get permission, and they got to you have to beg, please. So, but when you come to a quilters group, I'm thinking of a couple where a group of women, and they'll either be on a dining room table or in a bedroom with a big bed. And what'll often happen, there'll be some music playing, good music. There'll be something to drink, something nice to drink, and the music will be playing, and then they'll take out their sewing equipment. And then all of the women have these sashes. And men who quilt have them too. I have a sash, but I'm not a quilter. I just pretend. And what they have in these sashes, stick with me, Melissa. I'm come right to your question. So they in these sashes they have pieces, torn pieces from all manner of things. Some things wonderful, some things horrific. But they have pieces. And what will happen is that one woman will lay out a couple of pieces. Another woman will say, oh, I've got a piece that will go great with what you got. And then she'll reach into her sash and pull this nasty, ugly looking. I'll sit there like, what? But then she puts it down next to the others. And it's all of a sudden, I go, dang, that's beautiful when you put that ugly piece next to, wow. I mean, she could see possibilities where all I saw when she held it up was just something that looks, that's nasty. I mean, but she saw possibilities, and then the other one said, oh yeah, hold on, just a second. Yeah, how about this? And then they start to lay out that first layer with all these different pieces that come from everything. And I learned so much in that moment. That's fragment work, right? It's taking the pieces. So you take a little bit of that, what you described earlier, which is the classic disputatio way of teaching, where disputatio means you present a position, I present a position, we basically attack each other's position, and then it's inside of a certain kind of old world chivalric culture where people will kill each other, but you take a little piece of that, rip it out, and okay, but I think I can do something with this over here, right? That's how you build institution. That's how you build education. That's how you rebuild it away from the self-sufficient man. You quilt. You quilt. I want to kind of find this poem I did. It was in Christian Century on quilting. Maybe somebody can pull it. If anybody got their computer open, type in Willie Jennings, Christian Century, The Quilters, and there's a poem I did while I'm talking about this point. But this is really important to understand in terms of figuring out how to build institution at the site where it has been harmful. It can be smashed, and then pieces can be taken to construct something completely different, right? And that's important for us to keep in mind because, as I said this morning, all we have is fragments. We are fragment workers. The gospel is fragment. The gospel isn't a whole story start to finish, it's pieces. But it works. Those pieces work. And that's the way it's supposed to be. You found it? Yes, quilters. You got to, thank you. I'm going to read. Oh, yes, okay. Oh, wait a minute. Oh, it's kind of all jacked up, but let me see if I can still read it. All right. So this is in the Christian Century from March 2023. It's entitled Quilters. They sat in ancient places of the broken and the bombed, the torn and the taken, the loss and the lost, remembering the shattering, pockets and bags filled with remnants captured by keen sight, able to touch what be not as though it were possible to make. These multi-shaded women knew their anointing, the power to join broken glass, torn hearts, pebbles large and small, blood-stained brick, pieces of those aprons that smell like fresh bread, flashes of sadness caught in song, the extra fabric from the wedding dress, little napkins, quick melancholies, bunches of laughter, shreds from curtains, torn from soul windows. Then with eyes aligned, stepping out onto nothingness, handling things that could slice flesh and pierce skin, they placed pieces side by side, unprecedented. But now colors and shapes, dancing intricate new steps, making visible, pulsating joy, never before imagined. Then they decided in majestic wisdom to create soft shelter against the cold, against threat, against forging caress. And as the final threads joined, they saw what God wanted to call good, but could not create.
I think that is a perfect place to end our time together this afternoon. Willie Jennings, thank you so much for being here. I again want to thank the Office of the Bishop and the Commission on Ministry, as well as the High Plains Region Executive Council for sponsoring this event along with us today. And I want to thank all of you for your time and your wonderful questions and your attention. Thank you so much, and be safe. Have a great afternoon.